Hello.
Hello. Welcome to Authors of Google. So, as you all know, over the past decade, Steve Jobs has changed the way that we think about giving presentations by modeling a new form of interactive types of presentations. Today we're going to hear from the man that taught the world how to be like Steve Jobs. He has watched hundreds of hours of footage of TED Talks, and today he's doing it again, teaching us all how to talk like TED. So, without further ado, Carmine Gallo.
All right, thanks, Jess. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. I feel like I have a lot of microphones on me today. There's multiple streams going on, and that's why the mics. This is such an honor for me to be speaking at Google. First of all, thank you for changing the world. That's astonishing, and it must be an amazing experience to work here. And that's what I want to talk to you about today is world-changing ideas. How many of you have good ideas? How many of you think you've got a good idea? Oh, okay, most of you. Well, your ideas are your currency now. Your ideas are the currency of the 21st century. In the information age, the knowledge economy, you're only as successful as your ability to communicate your ideas persuasively. So how do you do that? I believe that there are three fundamental laws of communication, laws that I learned after studying hundreds and hundreds of TED Talks and also analyzing and interviewing some of the most famous TED presenters of our time. Now, it's not just me who says that communication skills are so important. Ben Horowitz is a very well-known local venture capitalist. With Andreessen Horowitz, he was behind Facebook and Twitter and many other companies as well. And obviously many of you know him as a substantial investor. He was at South by Southwest, and he gave us this quote. Storytelling is the most underrated skill when it comes to entrepreneurship. He was speaking specifically to entrepreneurs. Storytelling, the ability to tell your story convincingly, persuasively, in a way that really engages me, that's going to be your value. That's going to help you stand out in all of the noise and to stand out and move your brand forward and your careers forward. Ben Horowitz believes that. I certainly believe that. And this gentleman believes that. You may have seen him before, Warren Buffett, the billionaire. Listen to this audio clip where he is telling a group of business students. I believe this was Columbia University. He's talking to a group of business students. Listen to the value that he places on communication skills and public speaking.
Right now, I would pay $100,000 for 10% of the future earnings today. So, anybody wants to see me after this? If that's true, you're $1 million asset right now, right? If 10% of it is worth $100,000, you could improve about many of you, and I certainly could have when I got out. Just in terms of learning communication skills. It's not something that's thought. I actually went to a Dale Carnegie course later on in terms of public speaking. But if you improve your value 50% by having better communication skills, then it's another $500,000. In terms of capital value. See me after the class, and I'll pay you. I'm
Now, why would he say that? Because as Daniel Pink, a noted author, has recently observed, like it or not, we're all in sales now. That means that you are constantly selling yourself and selling your ideas internally and externally. It's the 21st century. We have new models of communication, don't we? We communicate in photos, videos, 140-character tweets. Well, I believe that a 21st century model of communication requires 21st century techniques, which is why I turned my lens from Steve Jobs, who was one individual, and in my opinion, the greatest corporate storyteller we've ever had, and I turned my focus onto TED, the TED Talks. Because TED, even though I'm independent, I'm objective, I am not affiliated with that TED conference, I've worked with many TED speakers. I've interviewed TED speakers. I've analyzed 150 hours worth of TED content, and I've categorized it. And I think I know why the best TED Talks go viral. But more importantly, for all of us in the room, is what can we learn from the world's greatest presenters and speakers that we can apply to make our message, our pitch, more persuasive, more convincing, especially if you only have, so let's say you don't have 18 minutes. You have 5 minutes to convince your boss to back your idea. How do you get it across? How do you persuade? That's what we're going to talk about today. I believe that there are 3 fundamental components that all inspirational communication has. Anytime there is a conversation, a presentation, a pitch that we consider persuasive, these are the 3 components that they have. They are emotional. That conversation is emotional. You have to touch my heart before you reach my head. Those conversations are novel. They teach me something new. And finally, they're also memorable. It doesn't matter. Your idea doesn't matter if I can't remember what you said. So we're going to talk about each one by one. Let's talk about emotional. How do we make ideas emotional? First, passion. Passion is everything. You cannot inspire unless you're inspired yourself. It's also important for your career. Dr. Larry Smith gave a very famous TEDx event. He is a University of Waterloo economics professor. He's been studying passion and entrepreneurship for decades. And he says passion is the thing that will help you create the highest expression of your talent. I asked him after his TED Talk, Dr. Smith, but how do you identify passion? This all sounds good, and I agree with it, but how do you identify it? What is it when we say that person is passionate about something? I want to follow my passion. That sounds so cliche. What exactly does that mean? He pointed me to an excerpt from his now famous TED Talk, and here's what he says about what passion means. Probably the best definition I've heard.
Passion is your greatest love. Passion is the thing that will help you create the highest expression of your talent. Passion, interest, it's not the same thing. Are you really going to go to your sweetie and say, marry me? You are interested. Won't happen. Won't happen, and you will die alone. What you want is passion. It is beyond interest. You need 20 interests, and then one of them might be grabbing, one of them might engage you more than anything else, and then you may have found your greatest love in comparison to all the other things that interest you. And that's what passion is.
Okay, your greatest love. Oh, by the way, he's really passionate, isn't he? He's worked up, and I asked him, Dr. Smith, you're going nuts on this. What's happening? He said, Carmine, what you have seen is 40 years of pent-up frustration, of telling people that they need to follow their passion in order to create the highest expression of their talent. And he said, Carmine, wasted talent is a waste I cannot stand, which is why passion is so important to him. But I love that definition, your greatest love. How does that relate to us? How does that relate to, say, entrepreneurship? I write for Forbes, also the books that I write. So I have this amazing opportunity to interview and spend time with some of the great leaders of our time. So let's talk about this idea of your greatest love, and what does that mean to follow your passion? Here's a photograph of me and Richard Branson. Richard Branson always seems to be smiling. I think when you've got 5 billion reasons to smile, you're always happy. He's always happy. But when I asked him, what's your greatest love? It's not getting people from point A to point B on an airplane. That's not his greatest love. His greatest love is disrupting the status quo. It's elevating the customer experience. Some of you are familiar with Zappos, I'm sure. Tony Hsieh, who sort of elevated the customer experience. Speaking of that, I've interviewed Tony Hsieh. His greatest love is not the shoes, which is very interesting. He sells shoes online, but he wears old shoes till they're worn out. So when I asked him, what's your greatest love? He never mentioned shoes. He says it's delivering happiness. How can I deliver happiness to my customers and my employees, which is why he's created that great culture at Zappos, a culture like many of you have experienced here at Google. So the point is, he's always thinking, the most inspiring communicators and entrepreneurs don't really pitch their product as much as they pitch what the product means for the lives of their customers. Big difference. Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks. Actually, they think he's the founder. No, he's the CEO of Starbucks, and he's going to explain in a video clip I'm going to show. But Howard Schultz, when I interviewed him, completely changed the way I look at communication skills. And this was several years ago for one of my books. He spent 2 hours with me, and not once did he talk about coffee. I was the one who brought up coffee. That's because that's not what he's selling. He's selling a better customer experience. He is selling a workplace that treats people with dignity and respect. He's selling community and the romance of coffee. But it's not about the coffee. It's so much deeper than that. He gave me a quote that I'll never forget. He said, Carmine, coffee is the product that we make, but it's not the business we're in. So you need to think about that. That blew my mind. I can't tell you what happened. I mean, I completely changed the way I look at communication. You got to think about not your product, but what business you're in. This week, Oprah Winfrey created her first big product partnership with Starbucks. I think it's the Tivana brand. Some of you may have that tea. It was her first big product partnership, and she decided to go on partnership with Howard Schultz because, and I'm paraphrasing, but she said because Starbucks is so much more than a company. It's so much more than the coffee. It means so much more. That comes from him. That comes from the entrepreneur, the leader, and the way he communicates, the vision behind his brand. Watch this very short video clip taken a few months ago of Oprah Winfrey first interviewing Howard Schultz. Listen to the way he talks about the brand.
People think I'm the founder of Starbucks, but I was employee at Starbucks when they had 4 stores. I was sent to Italy to do a trip for Starbucks and came back with this feeling that the business that Starbucks was in was the wrong business.
Because at the time, when you were employed by Starbucks, they just sold coffee,
Yes.
and they actually did not sell a cup of coffee.
That's correct. And so what I wanted to bring back was the feeling of richness and the sense of community, the idea that we could build this third place between home and work in America.
So you're taking back to that little coffee shop and the feeling of that. There's something
You know?
yeah,
Yeah.
like absolutely, when I was reading it, felt like
I was out of my mind.
Oprah.
had you gone in for coffee?
Yeah, like anyone else.
Yeah.
But I walked in and saw this symphony of activity and the romance and the theater of coffee.
People gather
Yeah,
around.
and also coffee being the center of conversation, of social events, and the sense of community. And that is what spoke to me, and that's what I wanted.
Coffee at the center of conversation. Do you see how it goes? His communication about his brand goes so far beyond just the physical product. Passion, by the way, is contagious. I did a lot of research into the science of persuasion for my new TED book, and I interviewed neuroscientists and researchers. And what they're finding is that passion is indeed contagious. We already know this intuitively, but they are finding that if you meet someone or listen to someone who is genuinely and authentically, those are important words, but genuinely enthusiastic about their product and what it means for the lives of their customers, that it will significantly alter your perception of that person and that product. So you got to think about passion. Now, how do we transfer that passion? How do we transfer what we're excited about? That's where we have to master the art of storytelling. All of the greatest presenters in corporate America today, and certainly on the TED stage, are fantastic storytellers. Research is finding some remarkable things. A remarkable thing happens to your brain on stories. Princeton University researchers have found that if I tell you a story, the same areas of our brains, if they take an MRI scan, they're looking at brain blood flow, the same areas light up. That means we are literally in sync. They call it mind-to-mind coupling. I just call it being in sync. Stories are powerful. Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook COO, is learning all about the power of stories. How many of you have heard of the movement that she started, Lean In? Right? Many of you, most of you now. So Lean In is a very powerful movement for young women in the workplace. I argue, and if you'd like to push back, please do. Save your questions for the Q&A. But I'm arguing that you never would have heard of Lean In. You would not be leaning in right now if it had not been for a viral 18-minute TEDx presentation that Sheryl Sandberg gave that led to a best-selling book that eventually sparked the movement. And here is why it went viral. Sheryl Sandberg recently admitted, just a few months ago, she talked about the TED Talk she gave several years ago that launched Lean In. She was ready to give a talk, in her words, that was chock full of data and no personal stories. A friend of hers, right before the conference, pulled her aside and said, "Sheryl, you look a little out of sorts today. What's going on?" And she said, "Oh, it's kind of been a bad day. Right before I came out to the conference, my little girl was tugging at my leg and she was crying and screaming, 'Mommy, don't go.' But it's okay. I'll work it out. I'll get it together." And her friend said, "Why didn't you just tell that story?" And Sheryl Sandberg was skeptical. She said, in front of people? You want me to tell that story in a presentation? And then she realized she had to be vulnerable. And she realized that in order to touch people emotionally, isn't that what we're talking about? Touching people emotionally, that she had to break down that wall and connect with them on that personal storytelling level. So here is how Ms. Sandberg started her now famous TED Talk.
Now at the outset, I want to be very clear that this speech comes with no judgments. I don't have the right answer. I don't even have it for myself. I left San Francisco, where I live, on Monday, and I was getting on the plane for this conference, and my daughter, who's 3, when I dropped her off at preschool, did that whole hugging the leg, crying, "Mommy, don't get on the plane" thing. This is hard. I feel guilty sometimes. I know no women, whether they're at home or whether they're in the workforce, that don't feel that sometimes. So I'm not saying that staying in the workforce is the right thing for everyone. My talk today is about what the messages are if you do want to stay in the workforce. And I think there are 3. 1, sit at the table. 2, make your point.
The story. It's the story that went viral. She applied the same technique to her book, Lean In. Again, the first chapter was all data, no personal stories. Her husband, true story, she just said this a few weeks ago, her husband read the first chapter and said, "This is like eating your Wheaties, because we know it's good for you, but it's kind of boring." And the book itself is now full of stories if you read the first chapter. 18 minutes leads to a bestseller, leads to a movement for millions of young women. Okay? An 18-minute presentation has the power to start a movement. I studied 500 TED Talks, categorized the content, and here's what happens. Pretty fascinating. Aristotle, for we communication geeks, is the father of persuasion. He said that persuasion occurs when you have 3 components. Pathos, which is what we're talking about now, emotion, storytelling. Logos is data, statistics. And ethos is establishing credibility for who you are. 65% of the majority of the best TED Talks, 65% are stories. 25% data, only 10% ethos. Sheryl Sandberg's talk was 72% stories. Brian Stevenson, for example, tells a lot of stories. Brian Stevenson is a civil rights attorney. He knows how to talk to people. He successfully wins cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, which, if you haven't guessed, is a pretty tough audience. So he knows how to persuade. When he gave a TED Talk last year, he received the longest standing ovation at TED. I talked to him afterwards. He told 3 stories from his life. He supports his stories with data, but the data come after the stories. So his template is stories, data, stories, data, stories, data. So he includes the data, but he supports his argument with stories. And his argument is, as a civil rights attorney, that young men and women in underprivileged and underserved communities are incarcerated at a much higher rate than others. So that's his theme. I want to show you a clip from this TED Talk because, again, he received the longest standing ovation at TED because it was deeply emotional. Here he tells a story about his grandmother. And I've got to set it up for just a second. He said that his grandmother pulled him aside when he was 11 years old and said, Brian, I want you to promise me never to drink alcohol in your life. And Brian said, well, okay, I'm only 11, so sure, I'll go along with it. Here is how he picks up the story. His theme, by the way, was there's power in identity. So watch and listen for how the story reinforces the theme.
I grew up in the country in the rural South, and I have a brother a year older than me and a sister a year younger. When I was about 14 or 15, one day my brother came home and he had this six-pack of beer. I don't know where he got it. And he grabbed me and my sister, and we went out in the woods, and we were kind of just out there doing the stuff we crazily did. And he had a sip of this beer, and he gave some to my sister, and she had some, and they offered it to me. And I said, no, that's okay. Y'all go ahead. I'm not going to have any beer. And my brother said, come on, we're doing this today. You always do what we do. I had some, your sister had some, have some beer. I said, no, I don't feel right about that. Y'all go ahead. And then my brother started staring at me. He said, what's wrong with you? Have some beer. Then he looked at me real hard and said, oh, I hope you're not still hung up on that conversation Mama had with you. I would say, well, what are you talking about? He said, oh, Mama tells all the grandkids that they're special. I was devastated. And I'm going to admit something to you. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. I know this might be broadcast broadly, but I'm 52 years old, and I'm going to admit to you that I've never had a drop of alcohol. I don't say that because I think that's virtuous. I say that because there is power in identity.
You see the template. Story ties back to the central theme. There's power in identity. Now look, I don't have all the answers. I'm constantly learning something about communication and persuasion. That's why I talk to people who frankly are more persuasive than I am. If you win Supreme Court cases, you're pretty persuasive. You know how to talk. So maybe Brian Stevenson has some pretty good answers. Maybe we should listen to him. Storytelling is powerful. How many of you enjoy consuming organic fruits and vegetables? Yeah, most of you, right? I see downstairs they had a nice organic section in the restaurant. You have this woman to thank. Her name is Myra Goodman. Myra Goodman, several decades ago, with her husband Drew, started a 2-acre raspberry farm and grew it into what is now Earthbound Farm, the largest grower of organic produce in the world. If it wasn't for her, you probably would not be having the abundance of organic that you do because she really pioneered the movement. She called me in October, and she was getting ready for a TEDx talk. For those of you who don't know, Tedx are the smaller, independently organized TED events. She called me in October, and she was getting ready to talk to this. It was a food-related event. And she knew that I had just finished a book on TED. I've known her for several years. She said, what advice can you give me? I said, please start with stories. You've got some great stories. You've got good data. You've got awesome data. But we're going to wrap that data in stories. For example, I said, Myra, I love that story that I remember long ago when you told me that you started literally selling raspberries at a farm stand in Carmel, California. And now you go into every Costco and they've got the entire section of organic. Here's how she started her TEDx talk. I think it was just a few weeks ago in March.
I have been a passionate advocate of organic farming for 30 years. I can still remember the exact moment when I knew I didn't want to use chemicals to grow our food. It was just 2 days after my husband Drew and I moved on to our original 2.5-acre raspberry farm in Carmel Valley, and I was standing between 2 rows of raspberries near a little orchard of fig trees, surrounded by the gorgeous green mountains, and the miracle of what was happening around me was stunning. I was 3,000 miles away from my 11th floor apartment on East 86th Street here in Manhattan, but I felt like I had finally come home. I just knew in my heart that we shouldn't try and conquer this beautiful earth with dangerous chemicals. Drew felt the same way, so right from the beginning, we made the commitment to learn to farm organically. Back when we started Earthbound Farm, Drew and I were two faces of small organic.
I just realized, I don't know why it's happening, but I can see it in real time here, and it looks like there's a slight delay when you see it on the projector. What did you notice, by the way? And I know we're going to have some Q&A in a minute, but what did you notice about the slides? What did you notice about the slides that she presented? Personal, visual, pictures. When we tell stories, we don't want to clutter the slides with a lot of words, charts, and text because it's about the story. The visuals complement the story. So make sure that and we can talk about this when we have the Q&A if you have questions. Save your questions. So emotional, touch my heart, passion, storytelling. Also, ideas that spread, which is the TED motto, ideas that spread. Teach me something new. Teach me something that I've never heard before, something new, unexpected, or surprising. There's science behind this. Dr. A.K. Pradeep, who is a neuroscientist in Berkeley, said that our brains are trained to look for something brilliant and new, something that stands out, something that looks delicious. When the brain detects something new, surprising, shocking, unexpected, it literally releases dopamine, which acts as a mental save button. I interviewed Robert Ballard. Robert Ballard discovered a little ship you may have heard of, Titanic, in 1985. And I actually asked him the silliest question. What makes you more nervous, actually public speaking or exploring an undersea world? He said, Carmine, almost dying 2.5 miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic is a lot scarier than any public speaking. So he has no stage fright anymore. He said, your mission in any presentation is to inform, educate, and inspire. Think about that. That's a powerful line. You can only inspire when you give people a new way of looking at the world in which they live. Researchers call that new way an emotionally charged event. It simply means that when you perceive something that is fresh, unexpected, surprising, and new, it actually creates that dopamine hit that I told you about. It's called, in the academic research, an emotionally charged event. Okay, so what does that mean in a presentation? How many of you have seen or remember the now famous TED Talk by Mr. Bill Gates? What do you remember the most from that particular presentation? When you release the mosquitoes. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Don't you remember the third slide? You don't remember the... Okay. His slides were professionally designed. They were really nice slides. You don't remember the slides. You remember the emotionally charged event. So here, for some of you who didn't see it, Bill Gates is talking about reducing childhood deaths in third world countries, deaths caused by malaria. Here's how he picked it up.
For example, there's more money put into baldness drugs than are put into malaria. Now, baldness is a terrible thing. And rich men are afflicted. And so that's why that priority has been set. But malaria, even the million deaths a year caused by malaria, greatly understate its impact. Over 200 million people at any one time are suffering from it. It means that you can't get the economies in these areas going because it holds things back so much. Now, malaria is, of course, transmitted by mosquitoes. I brought some here so you could experience this. We'll let those roam around the auditorium a little bit. There. There's no reason only poor people should have the experience. Those mosquitoes are not infected.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for putting me at ease. I know as a fact that Bill Gates is significantly working at improving his communication skills because he has to transfer very complex information and he needs to make it simple, engaging, memorable. This is one example. It's an extreme example. You're not going to release mosquitoes at your next Google meeting. I get that. But it's an example of creating what's called that emotionally charged event. The reason why you remember it is because you do not expect Bill Gates to release a jar of mosquitoes in a presentation. It's different. How many of you may remember watching last year Amanda Palmer, a performance artist, a musician, give a TED Talk? Did some of you see? Okay, this one actually went viral for a few weeks. It became very, very popular. Amanda Palmer is a musician. I'm not even sure where the music would be categorized, something like indie, punk, cabaret rock. Some of you might be familiar with those categories. This particular presentation that she gave last year was viewed more than 5 million times. She practiced a lot, and we can talk about practice maybe in the Q&A and rehearsal. She practiced more than 100 times on this particular presentation. But here's what people remember the most: the emotionally charged event from this particular presentation.
Studied in LA to make my living from music. For about 5 years after graduating from an upstanding liberal arts university, this is my day job.
Okay, so now she's talking about being a living statue, and she's going to talk about her experience and then bring it back into what she learned about the music business. That's what people remember most. Why? It's completely unexpected. She's using props. She's using visuals. She's telling stories. It is very unlike the way you would expect most presentations to start. So the reason why, if you watch a presentation or a movie, right, or any kind of visual event, you're going to remember one part, that one jaw-dropping moment. And that's what I mean by novelty. You need to teach me something new, but also shake out the cobwebs. Shake out the way the brain is sort of modeled to perceive information and give them something entirely new. Steve Jobs, the reason why I first wrote about Steve Jobs, he was brilliant at this. And he didn't do these extreme things. You never saw Steve Jobs stand on a milk crate or release mosquitoes. Those are extreme. But what did he do? Oh, but there is one more thing. When he first did that, that was completely surprising, completely unexpected. Steve Jobs was brilliant at that and incorporated something new and novel into every one of his keynotes. And finally, the brain has to remember it. It doesn't matter, your idea, your presentation, the beautiful slides. It's not going to matter if I don't remember the content. Let me give you some very specific techniques on making your pitch more memorable. All TED Talks, as you probably know, are limited to 18 minutes, the 18-minute rule. So it doesn't matter whether your name is Bill Gates, Sheryl Sandberg, or this week Sting. Sting talk last year was Bono. It doesn't matter who you are. You're only limited to 18 minutes. That's not a bad time limit. In fact, the TED organizers found that 18 minutes is long enough to have a serious discussion and short enough to keep people's attention. There's science behind this that you as communicators need to know. It's called cognitive backlog. Researchers at a Texas Christian University are working on this. It simply means that if I ask you to retain more information, the more information I pile on, like weights, pretty soon you're going to drop the whole thing. Cognitive backlog. And in fact, they're finding, depending on the research, anywhere from about 10 minutes to 18 minutes, people start losing attention. They actually will physically start looking at their watch, looking at their phones, and thinking about what they're going to do next. From 10 to 18 minutes. So during that time, you need to re-engage them. I'm going to break the 18-minute rule. I'm going to speak for more than 18 minutes. We're going to break that up. We're going to have some Q&A, so it's not just me speaking. I'm trying to add video clips, so there's two voices. Those are different ways of re-engaging. But if I were to just stand here with no visual display of content, no information, no second speaker, and I just talk to you, by now you'd be ready to tear your hair out. No matter how engaging a speaker you think you are. The brain naturally tunes out after about 10 to 18 minutes. So that's a very powerful concept. It's very important to understand when you're giving a pitch or a presentation. But hey, a lot of great things can happen in 18 minutes. John Kennedy inspired a nation to look to the stars in 15 minutes. Steve Jobs gave one of the greatest commencement addresses of our time at Stanford. That was 15 minutes. Martin Luther King, he took a little extra time to outline his vision for racial equality. That took about 17 minutes. Sheryl Sandberg started a movement in about 16 minutes. Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth was originally a TED Talk. Launched the whole global warming thing. So, you know, a lot of initiatives, movements can start in as little as 18 minutes. So think about keeping your content concise. And then think about this other technique that is so powerful, it works almost every time. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but this is close. The rule of three. The rule of three means that in short-term or working memory, you're only capable of carrying about 3 big ideas, 3 chunks of information. If I ask you to remember a phone number, you divide it up into chunks of 3 and 4. Threes is a very powerful number. It pervades every aspect of our society, from slogans like just do it, or Obama's yes we can, company names, SAP, IBM, CNN. And certainly literature, the 3 Musketeers, the 3 Little Pigs, the 3 Bears. The rule of 3. Authors know this very, very well. Writers know this very well. Great presenters know it very well. Brian Stevenson told 3 stories. He did not tell 12 or 2. Told 3. It's an important number. The brain needs more than 1, but after you give it about 5, 6, or 7 points, it starts to forget everything. 3 is a really good number. So tell your boss, there's 3 reasons why you should back my idea. There's 3 reasons. There's 3 new features of this product that I think our consumers are going to like. Now, when I was analyzing all the TED Talks, take a look at this. These are just some examples of the rule of 3 from the best TED Talks. 3 reasons why videos go viral. These, by the way, are not necessarily the titles. Some of them are, but most of them are not. But it's the theme of the actual presentation. 3 reasons why videos go viral. 3 ways design makes you happy. 3 ways the brain creates meaning. 3 clues to understanding your brain. A lot of brain stuff. That was 4. That was a bullet of 4. But there's more. 3 ways. 3 ways brands lose control. 3 ways crooks steal your digital data. 3 myths about big organic. Oh, and of course, 3 things I learned when my plane crashed. The rule of 3, very, very powerful. I do a lot of what's called media training, so I work with executives before they go on to important media interviews. 3 always works. I hate to sound too manipulative, but this is how the brain works. So if you give people 3 things that they need to keep in mind, they'll write them down. They want to know, what's the third? Or what's the did I miss the second one? People cannot ignore lists. 3 is a good list. And finally, to make it memorable, especially when we're delivering, it doesn't matter what software you use, either Google software or traditional PowerPoint, or I use Apple Keynote or Prezi, think visually. Think visually. This is called picture superiority. Picture superiority means that if I deliver content to you verbally, you'll remember about 10% of the content. If I add a picture or an image, retention soars to 65%. The average PowerPoint has 40 words. Several years ago when I started analyzing Steve Jobs' presentations, and again, I think we'll all acknowledge he was the original great corporate storyteller, I never found one slide, never, with 40 words. In fact, on average, it took him 10 slides to reach 40 words. It was all pictures, images that spoke so much more than any text could. When you're talking about a new computer like the MacBook Air, and you want to talk about how thin it is, no number of words could describe it like that photograph. So thin, it fits inside an office envelope. When you watch some of the great TED presentations, and Bono did a beautiful one that you can go on to TED.com to watch, and that was created in Prezi. Beautifully done. Some data, mostly images and pictures that supported the data. Steve Jobs, his PowerPoints are very unlike anything that you used to see from him at Microsoft. They're very visual, this whole idea of picture superiority. Whenever you see major executives now give presentations, maybe not internally, but certainly to external customers and at external events, they're all using this style. Whether it's Google, I've seen a number of executives use the style. Marissa Mayer is now using it at Yahoo. She's building beautiful presentations, if you saw her at CES. And actually, she was doing it here. She was still doing it here. Zuckerberg over at Facebook, I mean, and Apple, certainly, they continue to use this style. It's more of a visual style. So you need to think visually. This is an actual slide from a Bill Gates slide, where he was talking about global warming. His formula, he said it's a really simple formula. As CO2 goes up, the temperature increases, which leads to some really bad things. Okay? He's trying to simplify complexities. And when you simplify complexities, you need a simple slide. So that's an actual slide from a Bill Gates presentation. You can do this. I remember working for LinkedIn before they went IPO. And they started using some picture superiority to explain what they did, especially in the marketing department. This is a before slide. This is an after slide. So you see the difference. Here it's a lot of numbers. The most important numbers get lost. But if that's all I want you to know is how many members we have and how many members we're collecting every month, you can tell this is an old slide, only 70 million. This was before they even went IPO. But again, let's think about how are we going to display information visually. And those are the three components that all inspiring presentations need to have. They all need to be emotional, passion, storytelling. They all need to be novel. Teach me something new, unexpected, fresh, surprising, and of course, memorable. And there are a number of techniques that you can use to make sure that people recall the information that you've given them. Above all, keep this in mind, that you do all have the capacity to move people. You all have the capacity to educate, to electrify, to inform, to inspire. You have ideas. All of you have big, bold, transcendent ideas that need to be heard. Please communicate those ideas as persuasively as possible, because we need to hear those ideas. And we need to be able to act on your ideas. Thank you very much for inviting me this afternoon. Thanks, guys. Thank you. For those of you who have a few minutes, we are going to have the Talk Like TED books, so I'd love to sign them for you. But if you have any questions, I'd love to take them. Yes, Jess.
So, you talk a lot about the way that TED affects the structure of the presentation.
Right.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how TED as a concept affects presentations in society.
So how TED as a concept has affected presentations in society. I wrote a column for Forbes, and I said, like it or not, your next presentation is being compared to TED. Because you can't argue with the empirical evidence. The empirical evidence shows that we have 2 million TED videos streamed every single day. They are being seen in 150 countries. They're being translated into 90 languages. So this style, fresh, engaging, visual, emotional, is catching on. I've traveled to Europe and I've traveled to Asia, and I'll never forget being in Japan. I've had several people in Japan come up to me and say, we love the whole American style of presenting. And I said, what's the American style? One person said, you know, like TED. People see TED. True story. I had a rabbi come up to me. This didn't happen too long ago. Rabbi came up to me and he said, hey, Carmine, I need to improve my sermons. I said, well, why? He said, people in my congregation have told me, I got to step up my game. One person said, we see TED Talks. So whether you're a spiritual leader, whether you're a business professional, there is this new and fresh dynamic way of presenting that people don't know what they're looking for, but they know it when they see it. And I think that's what TED means. Yes, Tony, right? Tony? Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can just talk about the application of these principles to written communications where you're not there in person to present your idea.
Perfectly. So how do you apply this to written communications? The rule of three. The rule of three works beautifully. You have to have a headline, right? So that's the theme of your presentation. And all TED Talks, they all have themes that fall into 140 characters or less. You can actually tweet out the headline from every theme of every TED Talk. You could tweet them out. They're that short. Okay. And then, so give me a headline. What's the one thing you want me to know in this email? And then break it up. Give me some white space, just like a nicely designed slide. Should have some content and some white space. If you fill it up with content, then it's very hard for the eye to analyze. So what's the one thing you want me to know in this email, the one action you want me to take, and 3 supporting points? That's actually not a bad way of structuring an email. So whether it's a TED presentation or it's an email, you can use some of the same techniques.
I was thinking more about like what you do in your articles, for example.
Right.
Or in the book.
In my article. Articles are structured very much like a presentation. So we put most of our thoughts into the headline. What is the one thing I want you to know? And the headline would be the title of your talk, for example. That would be number one. Then I'm going to think about what story am I going to start with, what data am I going to use to support my argument, and the examples I'm going to use. Very much structured like a good presentation. But it always, see, I'm a former journalist. I worked for CNN and CBS and a number of other media outlets. We're storytellers. We think in stories. And I think that's what a great presentation does too, especially from the examples you saw today. Yes, sir.
When I was at IBM, we used to joke about making presentations to senior executives only 3 points because they couldn't absorb anything. I tried that on my VPs here.
Yeah.
I get thrown out of the room.
Sure.
So what can I do for people who actually don't care about emotion? They want the real numbers. They are going to push back really hard. And you'll push back, right?
Yeah. Oh, push back. Yeah. Because I am so confident. I am absolutely 110% confident in these techniques. And I'll tell you why. I have worked with nuclear scientists at Lawrence Livermore Lab. I live out in Livermore, Pleasanton. And I worked with nuclear scientists at Sandia in New Mexico. Nothing. I know what you do is complex. Nothing is more complicated than nuclear weapons and nuclear science. And they're using these techniques pretty effectively now. When we say 3, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm only going to deliver 3 points. That's a great question. It doesn't mean I'm just going to deliver 3 points. But I'm going to try to break up the content so it's not just a flood of information coming at you. I'm going to break it up into chunks. So maybe there's a component within my presentation that focuses on the 3 features. And then within those, I have subpoints. I gave you a lot more than 3 techniques. A lot more than 3 techniques. But I try to make it simple in terms of the categories. There's 3 categories that the techniques fall into. It's pretty powerful. But you also bring up another good point. Do not walk into your boss and give a TED-like presentation. Okay? You can take elements from this, but it's somewhat of a contrived scenario, right? This whole 18-minute thing. You don't want to distract people by doing something so different and unexpected that it actually becomes a distraction. But I would urge you to start using some of these principles to make for a more engaging conversation and a more engaging presentations. Look, I'm not going to mention the name and I won't mention the company because he might recognize himself. An executive middle-level manager called me from a global technology company that all of you would know. Called me last year. And he said, Carmine, over the last 2 years, I have improved my presentation skills. And he showed me a deck, very unlike the decks that are typical and standard at this particular tech company. It's very old school PowerPoint. His are more like this. He said now he's been considered an evangelist. And he is being flown all over the world to give presentations to prospects and to new clients. Because even area managers know they can't give a presentation as good as this guy can. So he's actually been labeled evangelist. And I said, what does that mean to your career? He said, well, in a company of 80,000, it gets me a lot closer to being a country manager. And a country manager in my company is the equivalent of $1 million with salary and bonus. So presentation skills in 2 years went from old school to radically different, has actually elevated his stature within this company. So again, it does come back down to public speaking, communication, persuasion. Yes, sir.
Whenever anybody has to stand up and talk about standing up and talking, I think they put themselves at risk, but I really enjoyed the presentation.
Oh, you enjoyed it? Good, thanks.
I noticed there's a lot of other kind of craft in your presentation.
Yes.
I mean, obviously you tried to illustrate the point you were talking about.
So you're suggesting I didn't give you everything?
Well, I was going to ask a simpler thing, like, you know, content aside, what are the 3 most important things about, you know, presentation?
I'll give you one. Okay. I'll give you one. Practice. That's what I didn't talk about. Practice. You only hear this when you talk to people who are great presenters. You wouldn't get it just from watching a TED Talk. Some of the best TED Talks, the ones that have been seen 20 million times, were practiced and rehearsed 200 times. That Amanda Palmer one was practiced, she practiced it 100 times. Remember I showed you that Myra Goodman? She practiced every day for about 3 months. Every day for 3 months. Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor, which she is a Harvard brain researcher, she has the second most viewed TED Talk, about 15 million views. She practiced 200 times. Steve Jobs practiced, and I know this is a fact, practiced relentlessly. He knew every font, every slide, every demo, drove his engineers crazy, but he made sure that he practiced. And that's why he made it look effortless. When you see a presentation that looks effortless, it's because a lot of work went behind it. Yeah. So look, let's do this, folks. I will be around for a few minutes. I'm going to be around for a few minutes. Is there one more question? Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you had any insight as to how one gets elected to give a TED Talk at the main...
Oh, how does someone get elected to give a TED Talk? It's very difficult to be on the national TED stage. This year was held in Vancouver. It's only held once a year. That's the big TED stage. That's where you see Sting and Bill Gates and the others. And apparently Sting gave a sensational TED Talk in Vancouver. It hasn't been uploaded yet, so I can't wait to see it. Unless you're curing malaria or your name is Bill Gates, probably aren't going to be invited. It's very, very difficult. But there are the smaller Tedx talks, which are regional, community-based. Some are much better than others. Some are more prestigious than others. And you can go directly to the websites of those TEDx organizers, and they're always looking, for great speakers locally. And guess what? The video still goes to the TED page, so it's still kind of in the same network. I'm going to hang around. I'm going to sign books. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to meet as many of you as possible and continue to answer your questions. Jess, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, everyone.